One, two, three.
Good evening and welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. And for those who haven't watched the programme before, let me remind you that Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fiarste here and Féile an Phobal. And my guest tonight, and I have to say this is one of the few luxuries of doing programmes like this. My guest tonight is my friend, so I'm declaring an interest, and it's the Reverend Bill Shaw. And I have never got used to calling you the Reverend Bill Shaw. The Reverend doesn't it's not my stereotypical view of what a Reverend is. So
That's
for those that don't know you, and that's very few, I have to say, how does a Sandy Row boy end up in the middle of the New Lodge Road with a ministry? So tell us a wee bit about that journey. Then I want to talk about Heather and the boys, but just a wee bit about that journey.
okay. Well, it's the first time I met Jerry Adams at the Duncairn where I work. Jerry had heard a little bit, but his question to me was sort of like yours, Joe. He says, "What sort of a minister are you?" And I replied, Jerry, that's a question that a lot of people ask, and depending on their tone, it can either be a threat or an invite to talk. I take yours as an invite to talk.
Oh, it's an invite, absolutely.
I for 30 plus years I've been a ordained Presbyterian minister. For almost 23 years of those years I've been working out of a former church building at the top of the New Lodge. So I suppose for a Sandy Row boy, it's not a big journey geographically, but it's a long journey, a pilgrimage in many other ways. So yes, I grew up in Sandy Row in the 60s. Again, like most other folk growing up in the inner city, even in those days before the peace walls, we didn't get to meet the other. So all of my friends in primary school and then in secondary school, I went to secondary school in Roden Street, just off the Grosvenor Road, Kelvin. So I didn't have the opportunity to meet Catholics. We had some extracurricular activities, even in the mid-60s, with St. Peter's boys that would come down to Mulhouse, which is now part of the Royal. So there was a little bit of exchange there. And that was one of the attractions, even growing up, that you got to fight with Fenians if you went to Kelvin. It's not a recommendation that probably most schools would want, but that was part of the fair growing up in the mid 60s, even before the conflict. So I say that as a way, I suppose, explaining that my contact with the others, the other being Catholic, was extremely limited.
What kind of I just imagine 16-year-olds sitting around or standing around a street corner, and people going to work in the shipyard, people perhaps get into some of the services, or people. And were you saying then, I want to go into the ministry, or did this come at a later stage? Or
a later stage, yeah. No, as a 16-year-old, tech drawing was my thing. I didn't excel in a lot of things, but tech drawing was one of those things that I loved to do. My uncle had been a draftsman in Mackey's, and as well as my dad, of course, but my uncle would have encouraged me in giving me drawing equipment from a very early age. So that's what I wanted to do. So I left school at 17 with O levels, and I went to Millfield Tech and did a diploma in building studies, a 2-year full-time course in Millfield Tech. And at the end of that, I was offered what was supposed to be a summer job and turned into a permanent job with a builder in East Belfast. So I became an architectural technician. I helped design houses for the builder to build them. So I worked in construction for 10 years, during which time I got married, started a family. And I suppose as far as this interview is concerned, given the question about my title. I had a religious experience, or a coming to faith is probably the way I would describe it now. I was 25, 26 when that happened. As I say, I was married. I was working in construction. I thought that was going to be my career. I was quite happy doing it. I didn't necessarily see myself doing anything else. Certainly not church related, because my connection to church, even growing up, apart from Sunday school in Great Victoria Street Presbyterian Church, was tenuous. I had no real interest in faith issues or big questions. For me it was about, I suppose, initially getting married, getting a mortgage, getting a house, and holding down a job. The coming to faith changed all of that, not for the first time, and not for the last time.
To help people kind of understand that coming to faith experience, I mean, to say that it's life-changing is an understatement. You know, it couldn't be more life-changing, I suppose, in many ways. Was it a frightening experience? Was it like a kind of a Damascus Road conversion? Was it, am I going crazy here? Is this?
Well, no, my wife thought I was going crazy. For me, it was periodically, I mean, but usually when I'd had a few beers with my mates after a football match, you know, conversation might have turned to eternal matters and heaven and hell and stuff like that. But apart from those times, I had no real interest. We only really started attending church when my wife was pregnant.
Heather?
When Heather was pregnant. So we started attending the local Presbyterian church, because that's what we were nominally. We'd been married in Ballysillan Presbyterian Church, which was Heather's home church. So we started attending the local Presbyterian church, just basically so that we would get our name in the roll, and we could have our baby, or our son, as it turned out, we could have him baptized, which was the sort of done thing. But it was during that period, as I say, that at a particular service on an Easter Sunday morning, where the visiting preacher, his evangelistic message, I suppose, really hit home, and caused me to think about questions that had, I suppose, been bubbling around. And I chatted with him afterwards in one of the back rooms, and I went away and had some thoughts and thinking about it. Came back to see him in the evening, and what I thought was the end of my spiritual journey. It turned out it was just one of many conversions.
For many people, including myself, we have an image, wrongly, I have to say, of priests or rabbis or mullahs or ministers in old-fashioned bicycles, or dressed in black, going to family wakes and going to family bereavements. And you fit none of those. I don't even know if you can ride a bike. But was that began a journey, and that journey meant nearly a formal re-education. So you had to study then. So what was that like?
Well, as I say, I thought, if you like, in coming to faith, and in a personal sense, taking Jesus as my role model, that would be it. I would still do what I did, and I kept playing football for the old boys team. I kept doing the things I was interested in, the things that I've always been interested in, which is music and football. As I say, our son was born not long after that. So I'm a new dad, and all the challenges and scary things that entails. The minister bit came a couple of years later, where I suppose for the first time I began to question, well, was I meant to do something else? Was this to be more of a commitment? And so I chatted with older Christians. I went to see the minister. in my home church, and I talked over. So he encouraged me to think. He was one of a number, encouraged me to think about full-time ministry. But the picture that you painted about a cleric on a bike with a collar and things was not how I saw myself. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I decided that I would explore what that meant and what it entailed. Chatting with my wife, because there were implications obviously for her as well. Anyway, cut a long story short, I officially applied to the Presbyterian Church to be accepted as a minister, a student for the ministry. They asked me to go and chat with the dean at Queen's University, the Presbyterian Seminary was attached to talk about academic qualifications to get me into the degree course. That ultimately meant that I had to do an A-level at Bible College at night while I was still working to get the qualification to allow me to start Queen's, which I did. So I left in the summer of '85. To give a frame of reference, I left work for the last time on the Friday, and on the Monday I was a fresher, a 29-year-old fresher at Queen's University doing theology as a student for the Presbyterian ministry. So I did that. I graduated in '88 and had a further year of study at Union College doing Irish church history and some other things. But I was able to combine that then with starting a formal assistantship on the Shankill Road in Agnes Street. So
what, a young radical minister in a working class heartland that has been decimated of nearly every hope and education and job opportunity and housing and all of that. Was it I want to change the world, or I want to bring the Bible to people, or what was the kind of inspiration for you?
Well, you paid me the compliment of saying a radical. I wouldn't have been radical then. I'm not sure if the title applies to me now, but certainly when I started as the assistant minister in a very conservative church in the summer of 1989, I wasn't. My theology was ultra conservative. My only model for doing church was preaching in the open air and evangelistic work, and then Sunday services. So I certainly couldn't have attached the title radical then. But the 3 years on the Shankill Road, because of the social circumstances that you very rightly describe it, Joe, I became what I later understood to be disillusioned with the church's response to social issues. And when I say the church's, I mean the Presbyterian Church. That we seem to be, and this is where my heresy begins to form, we seem to be more concerned with heaven and less concerned with the problems, that everyday problems that people faced in working class communities, like Sandy Row where I grew up, like the Shankill where I was the minister. So you were ministering in a vacuum that I found by the end of my 3 years assistantship almost suffocating. And as I say, then in our system, then once you've finished your formal assistantship and been ordained, church, you're available for a call. So I accepted a call to be minister of two churches in the Portadown, Craigavon area. One was in what Belfast people call Craigavon, which is really Brownlow, halfway between Portadown and Lurgan, where our manse, my manse was, the manse that the church provided us with. So all that frustration and the lessons that the stuff I'd learned and the mistakes, I took those with me, determined that I was going to change the world in Craigavon. And that I was going to as well as preach the gospel faithfully, I hope, I was also going to be concerned about the living conditions that people were faced with, and the everyday struggles that people had. So that, am I jumping ahead, or is that okay?
No. I find it fascinating, and one of the things that I've learned from you, actually, and you talk about not being at that stage in your life, not being particularly radical, and you most certainly are radical now. But one of the things that I have learned, that there's a whole hidden history of Presbyterian aspirations. Like you talk about the Shankill, Amy Carmichael, a working class Presbyterian girl who changed the perception of women and religion in her own confines, and then of course she goes to India. But I'm wondering, you go to Portadown, you're a Belfast person in Portadown or Brownlow, which is hard enough anyway, because Belfast people know everything, and which we don't. But even the things, the ideas that you're thinking about out loud, did it cause you difficulties with other ministers or with the hierarchy, or?
Not at the start. It was interesting because when my wife and I, when I accepted the call, obviously at that stage we had two boys, two small boys, primary school age, and we asked about the manse, and the lay leadership of the congregation said, well, we were going to, the manse that historically the church had since the 70s, the little estate, because Brownlow is little estates, some fairly wealthy and affluent, and some working class. So where the manse was, it had become an entirely Catholic neighbourhood on the edge of Mornview and Lurgan, and they said that they were going to sell it and move us into a Protestant area in Portadown. Because I had the feeling at that time that the biggest part of my sense of calling to the Craigavon Portadown area was to work in this housing estate, because I'd grown up, we had moved out of Sandy Row just before the conflict in '69, so I suppose my teenage years were spent in Finnegy Estate, although I continued to go to school in Sandy Row, Donegal Road area. So I felt at home, and I felt called to work in a housing estate context, because a couple of summers I'd worked in different housing estates, churches and housing estates. So we wanted to live in that context. So we said, look, give us a trial, let us see if our boys settle. And our boys did settle, and two boys became three boys. But so their friends were Catholic boys. Our neighbours were all Catholic, and that was the first time in my life that literally my neighbour was a Catholic. First time in my life that I had daily contact with the other. And when our kids were having sleepovers, they went to neighbours' house, and when their kids came to ours, so the kids didn't make any difference to the kids. They had some interesting conversations, but what also happened at that, and again, since you're going to ask me a question, so let me jump in. What also happened early in my time, the Drumcree situation, basically, I know historically Drumcree was a flashpoint, but around 93, 94, so I'd gone to Craigavon in 92. So within a year, say the Drumcree situation erupted, and so this is obviously pre-ceasefires and all that other stuff. But what that did for me was make me question, first of all, what I believe, how does it impact how I live with my neighbour, who was Catholic, literally Catholic, and the woman next door, and she would look after our house if we were on holiday, and I would have said to my wife Heather a couple of times, I wonder, does Edna think that we're like that, demanding to march and all that stuff. I was never in there. And also in the other church in the other side of Portadown that I was also a minister of, quite a number of the men folk were Orange, and were involved in the Drumcree situation. So that forced me for the first time, if you like, in my Christian life, to really consider what the Bible said to me first and foremost, as someone who purports to follow Christ. What does that say to me about how I treat my neighbour in a community where historically there's conflict and division? So that was another conversion moment for me, in that I started to read the Bible with I suppose a different set of glasses, and try to strip away the crap that church, and in both our church, both traditions, have forced on the text of Scripture, and reconciliation became the focus.
Well, the question I was going to ask you, and then I want to come into that role of reconciliation and the journey to the 174. All along and through all these battles, and for you sometimes, and I've worked with you in different projects, it's a battle a day. Everything is you don't give things 70% of your energy, you give it 110%. And I know that, and anybody that knows you knows that as well. But Heather's in the middle of a newly ordained young minister who not only wants to save souls, but wants to save the world. And no better place than Brownlow to save the world from. But I mean, she becomes what? She becomes your advisor, as well as your wife, as well as a mother, as well as somebody who defends you and all that.
People often say nice things. You did this. That must have taken a lot of courage. Actually, the brave one in our partner is Heather, because she went along with so much, even though she wasn't as convinced as I was. She was the sane one, and the gracious one. I mean, she kept house. She also, during my studies at Queen's, she took part-time jobs to supplement, because we had a mortgage to pay.
Yeah.
When I stopped working and all of that. She did all of that selflessly. Within our tradition, obviously with married ministers, there was also a role within the church or the congregation that she was expected to play, but that was not, she was not comfortable with that at all. She wasn't one to stand up front and take meetings or do, she played her part within the life of the congregation, but all of that stuff she was really uncomfortable with. And there is an expectation placed on ministers' wives that I think is very unfair. They often say, you get two for the price of one, and so Heather did her own. She had a part-time job. She worked in Eason's in the shopping centre in Creavan. She did other jobs that sort of came and went to supplement the income. So she did all of that, while I was thinking mad things and what was the next thing that we could do as a congregation. And because Brownlow, there's enormous social needs and issues. There are little pockets of deprivation, such as you don't even see probably in the most disadvantaged neighbourhoods in Belfast. It's some really tough places where families really struggle. And I felt again, because of the journey that I was on, that as a congregation, a small congregation and a very faithful and willing congregation, that we should be trying to address those. We didn't have all the answers, and we didn't certainly have the resources, but I tried to challenge my folk that if we had the means and we were presented with a need, that we would try and meet those needs with no strings, that we weren't asking people to jump through hoops or join our congregation. That was part of the journey that I was on. But as I said, the backdrop to all of that was the Drumcree and the situation that I found in Portadown. I remember saying to my wife early on in our time, I'd come back for my tea, my evening meal after being out visiting in the Drumcree area, Corcrain, the edge of Portadown, and looking at new graffiti that had gone up on the wall. And I remember saying to Heather, oh, you would think somebody from Sandy Row and had worked in the Shankill would know what sectarianism was, but I hadn't seen it to the depth and to the degree that I saw it in Portadown. And as I say, that was a challenge to me, first and foremost, as to how I spoke into that situation. You know, where I was at, and then where I was trying to lead my two congregations that were one was a farming community, the one that was near Drumcree, and the other, as I say, was almost like an urban, a city congregation with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, some mixed relationships. In other words, in the Brownlow Church, but increasingly, as I say, in reading the scriptures with different glasses on, the demand or the call to be reconciled with our neighbour, regardless of our political aspirations or constitutional dreams, and whatever those divisions were, I felt that I had made the personal discovery that God's heart was one for reconciliation. And that became increasingly part of who I was. It became, I suppose, the focus of my preaching.
And was that a liberating feeling? Was that the kind of was that the purpose that you were looking for?
As I say, prior to that, Joe, as I say, my answer to the problems that we faced in this part of the island was to get everybody saved, and so that we I mean, that was me naively thinking that was my calling, that I was to be Billy Graham or some great evangelist. The reconciliation thing was something that, if you like, I stumbled across, but it was like there's another person, I'm not going to quote scripture, but a thorn in my side, or a stone in my shoe that I just couldn't get rid of it. It just kept coming back and back, and it become increasingly part of my own thinking, and I suppose pattern for ministry. How do I encourage my people to be good neighbours with their Catholic neighbours?
And vice versa, of course.
And vice versa, yeah. But I mean, I wasn't responsible for the other side. I was only responsible for my little flock, or the two flocks. But reconciliation became the thing for me, and ultimately that's why I'm at the trust.
Well, that was the next set of questions. 98, I think it was 98, you inherited a shell of a church. A church that had been used as a dumping ground for a former furniture factory or whatever.
Jerry Kelly bought a fireplace there.
Well, that's good. That'll save the world. But let me just tell you about the church. And amazed. I went to school in Barnagia on the Antrim Road, as you know. So I passed that church every day, every single day of my life, going to school and coming back from school. And even when I was mitching school, I met school in that area because it wasn't that far away. Hadn't been in the church, had never put in that big, Gothic, beautiful building, hadn't been in it, hadn't felt the need to go and see what it was. And it wasn't until you appeared that the church is opened in all its glory to the community. So you arrive at the 174, as it's known locally, and it's been architecturally abused, is probably the only word. It has become nearly derelict. So was it, oh my God, or was it, this is a challenge?
Well, first of all, the church building didn't. The job that I have as director or CEO was advertised at the beginning of 98. So I applied for the job. 174, the congregation had vacated the premises, so the manse, the halls and the church building were vacant. I applied for the job, was offered the job, and at the end of the interview, I asked the panel that were interviewing me, one of whom was the last minister when it was a serving congregation, because he was the original, he was the founder of 174 Trust. I asked what the plans were for the church building, which at that stage, as you say, was a second-hand furniture store. And the answer I got that night was, well, we don't really know. It'll depend on who the director is. So there was a guy trading from it. So I took up the job. I was interviewed for the job in March '98. And then when I was offered the job, we agreed a starting date of the 1st of May. And in between came the Good Friday Agreement. So 3 weeks before I started work on the 1st of May, Good Friday Agreement was signed. So I came as director, my office in the manse, and the only brief that I had from my board was get people using the place. That was get people. There wasn't a strategic plan. There wasn't a mission statement. We were an ACE scheme, so we had ACE workers that would have come in at the start of the day and then gone out and painted and did decorate and worked in preschools and after schools, and we had our own preschool and after school. So I find myself on I think the 1st of May was the Saturday or something, so it was probably the day after Bank Holiday Monday I started in the new lodge. And you know, I had never even driven, apart from the night I was interviewed, I had never even driven up the New Lodge Road, much less walked up it, because there's a guy from Sandy Row.
Yeah, of course.
There's that perception. So I'm in the manse, the top of the New Lodge Road, thinking, what the hell? What am I going to do? You know, what's this organisation going to do? So that was the start of, and I've got to say, and I want to place on record, first of all, as I tried to do with my board, that they took a risk with me. It's been the greatest time, and I'm not just blowing smoke, because you talked about freedom and liberation earlier on. That first week, I thought, well, I've got this free. I've got a board to answer to, but I don't have a Kirk session. I don't have, so how am I going to shape? But I had the freedom to think about those things, and to try it out, and all the stuff that I'd been thinking about, reconciliation work, and the need for our two traditions to at least find some common ground. That was all really, really exciting, and it continues to be exciting.
I have to say, and I said earlier on at the beginning, I find it difficult saying Reverend Bill. I don't find it difficult saying Bill, but very quickly there emerged nearly a love affair between yourself and the local community. And it is very much a partnership. It's very much kind of that you're not a minister in the new lodge. You're in the new lodge. You're part of that community and all of that.
I think
so. And I know you have a deep love of music as well as other things, but and the 174s became really important in terms of the traditional music scene in Belfast, and the BBC have done a whole host of programs from it. Was there a kind of a sense that you would provide or help to provide for the community what the community knew, or how did you stumble on the Irish language, which you're a supporter of, and the music, which you're? How did you develop that?
Okay, well, let me take you back to the time in Craigavon. I was thinking about this obviously with this interview of mine. Marianne Elliott wrote a book on Wolfe Tone. I think it was like the Prophet of Irish Independence or something.
Yeah.
So Wolfe Tone, I was vaguely aware of it. So during my time as minister in Craigavon, it must have been just published or something, but I bought a copy, and I devoured it. And I realised for the first time that Wolfe Tone wasn't Catholic. He wasn't a Presbyterian, but he was the Church of Ireland Episcopalian, but he was a Protestant, I suppose. And out of that biography on Wolfe Tone, I'm not going to say I'm a nationalist or a Republican, but I had a greater appreciation of historically what the conflict looked like. But also I was intrigued for the first time to discover how in the late 18th century, particularly in Belfast, and I would say that Presbyterians and Catholics found common cause to improve the conditions, first of all, for disenfranchised Catholic community, and also Presbyterians who were not quite the bottom rung, but a little bit above it. So I found all of that fascinating, and I've met Marianne Elliott a couple of times, and I've told her that story, and I've read other books by her. That was the start for me of a greater appreciation of, I suppose, Irish nationalism and what all of that meant. Now, I suppose in the scheme of things, that helped me. I don't know whether I could have come from the Shankill, even though it was a shorter journey. I don't know whether I could have come from being a minister in the Shankill Road to the New Lodge. I think I had to go by way of Portadown, and mistakes I made and problems I faced and things I learned about myself and about others. But that was, if you like, that was my primer for coming to the New Lodge. But also, probably within my first week, I resolved that I was not there. And there are lots of stories I could regale you with of where I felt God perhaps showing me that I wasn't the missionary coming to bring God to a godless people, that God was already there in the community. So one of the things I resolved to do was to listen to what was happening in the local community, and to make any contribution I could through my own personal involvement or through opening up the buildings for projects and for people. So that was an important learning for me, because I suppose traditionally, particularly when you get your theological degree under your arm, you think, you have all the answers, and you could plump you down in the middle of Africa or Asia, wherever, that you've got the answers. And one of the things that I learned on my journey, and I tried to put in practice when I came to New Lodge, was that I really knew nothing, and that I was privileged to be part of a community that were trying to sort themselves out in a post-conflict society. We had peace, but there were lots of social issues that needed to be addressed. So I think what I tried to do from day one was to say to community activists, in some cases ex-combatants, was that I was there just to work with them in whatever capacity and whatever level they wanted to work at. And as I say, you said it was a love affair. My wife, one of those anecdotal things, really early on in my time, my wife she had a part-time job over in Boucher Road, so our routine in the mornings, we would drive down from our home here in Carmoney, Glenvomley, down the Antrim Road. She would drop me off at the trust at the top of the New Lodge, and then she would take the car and then come back and pick me up or whatever. And she said to me one day, and I can't even remember whether we were going to work or whether we were going into town, but when we passed Curly's at Atlantic Avenue, he said, "Look at your face." And I said, "What?" I was driving the car. He said, "Look at your face." And I said, "What?" He says, "Look, you're smiling." And I hadn't really, it was a subconscious thing, but from really, really early on, in a way that I had no right to expect, as you say, the New Lodge folk took me in, I suppose, and I felt I was home. The streets were like the streets that I'd grown up in, and the people were just the same. And I tried to, that was part of the message that I tried to tell people in the New Lodge, but also then when I got the invitation to speak in Presbyterian churches about my work, I would also try and relate that to them and say, look, they're the same. We are the same. We are each other.
You also, and I have to say for the record, you went on to tell that story and to defend that community with the great and the good and all around the world, and in the White House and in Dublin with the president, and as a period you served as the chaplain to the Belfast mayor. You never ever lost that sense of of value, of working class value, who you were and who you are. We're running out of time, but we're not just quite out of time. But I want to mention two things. By nature, you're a very positive person, and that may come from your spirituality. But you're very positive, and you're very focused. You have that. The only time I ever seen that shaken and maybe rattled. I was with you one night in the waterworks when we lit candles for the Palestinians for a particularly bad period of bombing in Gaza. And you were frustrated with yourself about what we could and couldn't do to defend those people who were under attack. And I look over your shoulder and I see a Palestinian flag Palestinian scarf on your chair. And you have a passion for defending the Palestinian community and where they are. And do you want to say a few words about that?
You're going to start me crying again. Yeah, well, I've been twice to Palestine and the West Bank. The first time again was a life-changing. I went as part of a cross-community mixed group from Derry, from Belfast, from the south. Anyway, I went there with no baggage. I suppose I was raised in a home that was pro-Israeli, like a lot of Protestants, but ours was particularly so. But that wasn't something I knew a little bit about the conflict there, but wasn't invested in it at all. And I got the opportunity, the invitation to go. One of the other hats, a Belfast Interface project. I'm on the board there, and they've been invited for a board member to go, but it had to be a Protestant. And at that particular meeting, I was the only Protestant. They said, "Will you go?" And I said, "I'd love to go." But so anyway, I went with no preparation, certainly no emotional preparation, and very little historical context. And we spent 6 days, and it just blew my mind. The conditions the Palestinian people live under, occupation, with a jackboot, and I make no apologies for that just gets tighter and tighter. We stayed in Bethlehem. We visited Israeli projects, and we went to refugee camps on the West Bank, and I came home radicalized. I mean, really radicalized, and determined that I was going to find out more. So I've read countless books about the situation every day. I try and educate myself a little bit more, but also then I came back resolved to because I still couldn't give an historical argument or a political analysis of where it should go, or how peace could or how Palestinians could gain their freedom. But what I resolved to do, because again, traditionally here, Protestants support the Israelis and Catholics because of that solidarity with Palestinians. I resolved to speak into my own community and my own friends and my own family at every opportunity, and not to lecture them, but simply to tell them what I saw, which no one can dispute. I mean, what I saw, and the stories that I heard, and the people that I met, and I've tried to do that. That was October 2013. I then went back in 2018 for a conference in the West Bank, again a Christian conference, because the Christian churches, in solidarity with their Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine, have called out the Western Church to show solidarity with them in their demands for freedom and human rights. So I was back in Bethlehem. The cafe that you see I got in Hebron, which is a microcosm of the problems that the Palestinian people face, whereas really settlers from all over the world are, just pushing the indigenous Palestinians out. So that's the cafe is every day is just to remind me of their plight. I have, if this was my office back in the Duncairn, you would see a Palestinian flag in my office, along with little things that I've brought back from Palestine, from the West Bank, to remind me of what is an unfolding tragedy at the moment, where the Israeli land grab is just being accelerated with the encouragement of the president in the White House, and I really, you talk about me being positive. I came back in December 2018, so 5 years after my first trip, and people, they knew how excited I was to be going back. And when I came back, they were saying, "Well, did you enjoy it?" And I said, "No, I didn't."
I want to finish with two questions.
Sorry.
But no, and I don't want you to apologise, and I think it's very important that we do defend those who need to be defended.
Yeah.
And in this case, clearly the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause needs to be defended. But two questions, and these are related to my experience with you. I sat with you in Rosemary Street Church, and we listened to the program around the years of the Enlightenment, around the 1788 rebellion, and before and after, and that radical grouping within the Presbyterian Church, that grouping of people, and we mentioned Amy Carmichael earlier, but that grouping of people who, for instance, opposed slavery, that grouping of people who set up Clifton Street Poorhouse, that grouping of people who fought for what was right. And I think it's a period of history, of our history, collectively our history, that has either been neglected or forgotten about or written out of history. So that program of enlightenment, is there any plans that we kind of revisit that?
Well, that event we were at really started as a conversation between Eamon McMahon and myself, a trade unionist.
Yes, I know him well. Yeah.
Raised Catholic, but probably would describe himself as an atheist, but because of our shared love of Palestine and that camp. But we were sitting having coffee one time, and we just were having that conversation that you were just saying, and it was at a particular time where in Stormont we seemed to be in deadlock, and we were sort of just whimsically talking about, wouldn't it be great if it was back in the late 18th century where we found common cause, where social justice was on the agenda and all of that stuff. So we gathered a mixed group of people, some academics and some activists, and we formed a little group, Reclaim the Enlightenment, because we feel that period has much to teach us at this particular. So they're very active. We meet at the Duncairn, at least the little steering group meets at the Duncairn usually, and plans events. So we've had events to mark Bastille Day, 1792, and all of that that was celebrated in Belfast by its citizens, Protestant and Catholic alike. And our desire as a group is to, I suppose, not just look back in some sort of benign way about, oh, wasn't it great, but how we can recover that, and how we can coalesce around those similar issues and find common cause, so that we can make our city and make this island a place where everyone has human rights and equality, and feels that they can call this place home wherever they've come from, however long they've been here, or however short their period of time has been here. I think that's the sort of society that I want to belong to and I want to contribute to.
I've kept the most difficult question to the last, and this is the one that trips everybody up. And we talked about what was over your shoulder, and it of course was the Palestinian scarf. Over my shoulder you'll see a Bella, and it's Bella as the artist looking at, with a twinned head, looking at Connolly and Pierce. Okay, so that's his, who do you take your direction from? The young minister that graduated, that was going to save the world, and the slightly older community activist that knows how difficult it is. Do you recognize both of them? Have they merged as one?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be who I am today if that stating the obvious. I think I had to go through that journey. I still want to change the world, or at least my part of the world. I've always said to my three sons that when they get frustrated about global issues or whatever, and I said, well, there are things that are above our pay grade. There are things that we will not be able to affect to change, but what we can do is be an influence within our circle of friends, and to make the place that we call home a better place than it was than we found, and certainly that I suppose that's, if I'm going to leave a legacy, if that's where you were going with that question, that I would want to be able to leave, shuffle off this scene of time, having left the place in a better state than it was.
We couldn't finish on a better quotation. So, my friend, Reverend Bill Shaw, thank you, and from Scéalta and from Bill and from Joe. Thank you. Great interview. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Slán.